kill you.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Zaku Talk. This season, doing G versus Wing, and this week we're going to do episode 3 of both of these shows. I am your host, Patrick Scale, and with me this season is the wonderful
Bob Skerry.
All right. Bob, how has your week been? What's been going on with you?
My week has been fine and dandy. Thankfully, as I've been doing a bit more role-playing gaming on Twitch and with friends, I have been developing a greater sense of my vocal capabilities and my just strictly acting capabilities. And between that and some very much needed affirmation from individuals, I feel heckin' great. I don't know if are we allowing swearing on this one?
Yeah, I mean, are you afraid that hecking was a step too far?
That would be the funnier way, but no, I'm legitimately asking.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I think it's fine.
All right, cool. Yeah. So otherwise, I'm feeling heckin' great, and I'm just looking forward to doing some more work. I'm going to be getting a new microphone in soon, and I might even be looking at a couple of voice coaches.
Ooh, spicy.
Spicy. What about you, Skeyhill? How has your week been?
Well, it looks like we've on an older project that I've been working on since March, right? We fortunately got to shoot right before the pandemic closed down the country. So we got to get in our very hectic shoot weekend, and we've been working on, and then fortunately it gave us extra time to kind of work on post for this project, which we needed to. We have finished the sound design, so now we've handed it off to the composer, and the colorist should be finishing up soon, and so we should be having it finished by the end of the month, I would think. But if it takes a little longer, that's okay. All the festivals we've been sending to have been allowing works in progress because of everything going on this year. So that's been very wonderful there. And then my Tuesday I spent in this day-long, it was like a 14-hour Unreal virtual conference, learning all these different things with the Unreal Engine you can do and you're about to be able to do in a new update that they're having. So I learned you can sort of use your iPhone as a motion capture for faces, which has been very wonderful. And I should be able to integrate that. We were learning sort of where the types of places are to access these LED panels that are going to be like the new green screens of the future. And a lot of these studios and event spaces that have them just sort of aren't putting on events with them anymore, so they're happy to kind of rent them out at the current time. And then just some stuff under the hood with C++ and how to code things to your advantage and take advantage of the sequencer in there. So a very busy, very high studying week for Patrick.
Well, it's funny when you said that you were at some sort of Unreal conference. I thought you were saying that it was bizarre, like everybody was Sealy or something like that from Evangelion.
No, just my old friend, Unreal Engine. My old new friend, the Unreal Engine. I'll be spending a lot of 2020 and 2021 with, as I learn it and then teach it to my upcoming crew on our next production that will be quarantine friendly. So, all right, it sounds like we've had some good weeks here. Bobo, would you like to bring us into the recap section on G Gundam, episode 3?
I will gladly bring us into the summary of this episode, Beat the Dragon Gundam, or as you would say in Japanese, Taose Majin Dragon Gundam.
Sure, but but like there was another part to that title, at least in my version, where it was like get him or the villain space beat the Dragon Gundam. So like they just love these extended titles.
That's what Taose is, and
okay, I see.
So Taose, get him, attack, what have you.
Yeah.
And then Majin would be the bad guy, What you're getting
like
there. Ma is bad.
One Majin Buu.
Exactly. Well, so here's the just as a little bit more of a language thing.
Yes.
Jin is often used as a suffix to denote a kind of person or what people will often use as race. What we call Saiyans here in America, to go with your Dragon Ball Z thing, is Saiyajin. Okay. Seiya being star and Jin being human, man, what have you. So they are literally starmen.
Okay, yeah, the Chinese have a similar thing with their kana ren. So I buy that the Japanese would have a similar construction.
Yes, and so Ma being bad, Jin
so
being
bad guy,
person.
bad guy, bad species. I love it.
As Domon travels to Neo China, he is approached by two Shaolin monks who urge him to take on the Gundam fighter of Neo China, who has apparently gone rogue. Domon accepts and goes off to find him. On the road, he is joined by a young boy, but they are subsequently captured by a band of thugs. As Domon manages to break out, the boy gets to the Dragon Gundam and reveals himself as Sai Saishi, the Neo China representative. He and Domon fight, but despite his young age, Sai Saishi proves to be a match for him, and the bout ends in a draw. As Sai earlier didn't recognize the man in the photo either, Domon and Rain head off once more.
Very succinctly put. For episode 3 of Gundam Wing, Heero wakes up to find himself at an Alliance hospital. Duo breaks in to help him escape and will eventually dredge up the Wing Gundam from the bottom of the ocean to return to him. Meanwhile, at the Corsica base, the Corsica Alliance base, Troa Barton, the pilot of the Gundam Heavy Arms, meets up with Catra, the pilot of the Gundam Sandrock, and almost engage in battle before Catra asks for them to become friends, and Troa surrenders in a very militant type style. At the same time, Zex is introduced to the Tall Geese by one of his old students, Walker, and this Tall Geese is the original prototype of all mobile suits. So, for story beats this week, what do we think of these 3 episodes? Let me just first preface with a very stupid story, where I sort of have this PlayStation game for the original PS1, Gundam Battle Assault 2. Gundam Battle Assault 1 did not come to America. Gundam Battle Assault 2, a great game because it's the only game that lets me play my favorite mobile suit with my favorite pilot. I won't tell you yet who they are. We'll reveal it by the end of the show, though. But it's sort of, this game was sort of the first time a lot of characters were introduced to America, like sort of all the double Zeta characters, because that translation never happened. So they didn't know who these people were. But Sai Saishi is in this game because it sort of heavily sort of advertised both Endless Waltz and G Gundam, and then they threw in some UC stuff as well. So Sai Saishi's in this game, but they don't really speak, and you sort of get only this small little kind of picture of him. But, you know, until I watched this show, you know, a couple years later, I thought it was a female pilot. I didn't know it was a male. Maybe it was based on the hairstyle or I don't know. It just felt like I was surprised when I first watched this episode way back when and that it was a male.
Well, just to that point, I know that oftentimes in America, when you have a young boy character, and even in Japan and other places, they'll tend to use raspier voiced women to try and sound like a young boy because they have that space of voice that makes you think of a kid that is prepubescent. And so you can have them play both male and female children, as opposed to if you try to get a man to voice a child, you're going to get a man sounding child. I will say, however, if you listen to the Japanese version of G Gundam, Sai Saishi is actually voiced by a guy.
Okay.
But it's one of those comedic relief style voices.
Yes.
Where they hang out up here a lot. Hey, bro. That sort of place.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to ask you. So Sai Saishi says bro perhaps 82 times in the show. What is...
I think that's hyperbolic, but go on.
What is... They tried to cram it in nearly, at least in the English version, nearly every other line that he said. Sometimes it would be multiple lines in a row. What is the translation in Japanese for bro? What are they trying to go for there?
So as opposed to the colloquial bruh, that you hear from like surfer dudes or so on. In Japanese, it's generally considered a nice thing to refer to somebody who is your superior of a given gender, Aniki, which is literally big brother, or Nesan. I don't think there is maybe One, but Nesan is big sis. Nissan also counts in the same way as Aniki. So when you hear him say, bro, he's saying like, hey, person who is a good older friend of mine, who I look to as a brother, we just shorten that down.
So is the intent in having this character say it, is it supposed to be sort of this ironic thing where he's sort of like needling Domon, or is it just sort of like they sort of say that anyway?
So at least in the Japanese, it is not quite as often as they did in the American. I think that's just to make it seem a little more natural, because commonly in both Japan and America, we use catchphrase sort of speech. Here in the States, it's literally just a phrase versus there might be some sort of a way that you end a word or a series of words with a given suffix. So in this case, when he's calling him Aniki, it's that he genuinely acknowledges the guy, but is also trying to butter him up as he's trying to weasel his way back to the Gundam. Because as I didn't get to say as part of the greater story piece here, we find that the Shaolin guys suck, by the way. the two Shaolin monks, they're awful. They stopped Domon from going into a Gundam fight with the Dragon Gundam that had been taken by a gang, and the leader of the gang just stole the Gundam because it went off course from Saisaishi. But they stop Domon and pull him aside to say, okay, we need you to defeat the Gundam. What was I just doing? What was I just about to do? And then when for whatever reason, Domon is trying to play like a brat, like, and what if I don't do that? They bounce back and put a knife to Rain's neck as though it's a threat.
Yeah, monks like holding people hostage. It's very impressive.
Oh yeah, absolutely. But what's even funnier to me is that we know Domon would not have taken that threat seriously, but it's also supposed to give us the sense that he does hold Rain to some great standing. And so he was probably going to do it anyway, and yet there he goes. And he even says once he picks up Saisaishi and they go to the following village, yeah, I guess I have to fight him. What the hell were you doing? You were driving there to go fight him, and then the Gundam goes through the town you're in, tears it to shreds. They steal your car that's part of your robot, and now you're like, well, now I guess I have to fight him. What were you gonna do? Were you gonna have tea with the guy when you got there?
Yeah, it feels like this episode wanted to be sort of like a little comedic thing, have a little comedic beat to it compared to the last two episodes.
Yes.
But Domon is so stiff of a character at the current time, but they never like tried to play off of him as a straight man, so they weren't able to sort of take full advantage of the tools that they had to make that approach. And so, yeah, we get a lot of head-scratching kind of moments here.
I will say, though, it might be because they're trying to acknowledge Hong Kong and or more so than Chinese comedy structure. It felt very much like a Stephen Chow film. So if you've ever watched Kung Fu Hustle, The God of Cookery, it kind of feels like that comedy where it's weird in places, and it's that weirdness that's supposed to be the comedy and not like a direct joke.
Yeah, you sort of have to view it as a comedy, because, especially once they get to the point where they get to the bandits' hideout, and it's in the Great Wall of China. And I'm just thinking, like, the whole wall, they took the whole wall, the thousands of miles to have a base. It amused me. And then you have Saisaishi sort of like floating as he's making jokes, which seems to be like not a literal thing.
Early 90s bit.
Yes. So, like overall, this is one where you have to be like, okay, just being silly G Gundam, I guess. So it's fine. It just, you need sort of someone for Saisaishi to play off that's a little more consumer friendly than the current iteration of Domon, is my thought.
No, and I think that's
Yeah.
fair. Go on.
So here, there's sort of two things that's confusing me. One, you can probably explain a lot easier, so I'll go with that one first. What is the point of these Gundam fights now? Because in the other two, it felt like he wanted to ask them if he's seen this person, and to get him in a fight is a way to get them to pay attention. I don't know why you have to go to that extreme, but that seemed to be sort of the crux of it. Is this sort of a qualifying round, or like what does he gain by fighting these people now?
So yes, you do have to have a certain number of wins under your belt as you go forward. You're trying to cut out other members of the various neonations in order to ensure that you have that that quality about yourself. You are acknowledging that on the destruction of the head, that is effectively, quote unquote, killing the Gundam in question, as we saw in episode 1. So the fewer combatants, the fewer candidates for being the ruler of the universe, the ruler of space, the solar system, what have you.
So the tournament proper hasn't started yet? And this is...
No, the tournament proper started
right
on that first fight that we saw between Shining Gundam and Nero's Gundam.
And it's just sort of this
that was
battle,
the thing that set off the
battle
ring that goes around the
royale
Earth
thing.
Yes. I didn't mean to talk through.
Yeah, it's okay. So we're just sort of in this battle royale structure now.
Yes, and
when is the cutoff point?
It's honestly been so long since I've seen this in full that I can't quite say. I know when the episodes start kicking in that let us know, but I don't know off the top of my head at this moment.
Sure.
I will say, however, there is another point to why Domon is going specifically to these places. He's going to these countries because of a list that we'll find out more about in the next 2 episodes, maybe 3, as to why he is going to these individuals, why he's trying to search after this man and having to talk to these specific Gundam fighters.
Yeah, I'm glad that they finally revealed that, because, you know, as soon as he showed up in China, I was like, okay, so he went from Italy to America to China. This doesn't feel like a very direct route. This doesn't feel, these things aren't, it's like the 3 furthest parts you could get away from each other, especially if you're just going to France and Russia anyway, you're already closer to certain things. You could have just, so I was just confused, you know, until I saw that list, which, you know, is enough for me for G Gundam. All I needed them was just like, is there a method to what he's doing, or he just randomly traveling and asking anybody along the way if they've seen somebody? So I was glad they do that. My next question that perhaps you don't have an answer to, and that's fine. The Saisaishi's Gundam's weapons. Why are they flags? It's a weird weapon already to have as a weapon. And also, it's weird that they make illusions. Also, how?
Okay, so my understanding is that, first of all, they're based on a style of combat where you're trying to take the eye off of you as you're moving, because each of the flags is going to be, if it were actual flags, they would be flapping in the wind, making sound to cover up any quiet noise you're making with your feet. And they are going to be distracting enough to a individual who is not expecting it to put them on a fight or flight response. It is not a traditional weapon. It is meant to be one of subterfuge, one of trickery. And we learned that from seeing how Saisaishi has acted throughout the episode. So it is fitting. There is a type of Chinese martial art weapon that is literally just a spear and scarf. It is called as such. The scarf on the end is typically red, so that way, you know, it fits well with blood and all that. But the eye-catching color of red is also going to catch you off guard before you see where the actual tip of the spear is. And so it is more likely to hit you because you are not able to anticipate it as easily. So that's where that is coming from. Okay. The reason why we can't see it and we're doing the upgraded tech version is we're seeing this screen that is an electrical response. It is likely that shorthanding it instead of explaining, the flags disrupt the sensors on the machine.
Yeah, I wish...
They do the same thing as the Chinese weapon.
Yeah.
But on a technologically advanced level.
Which is fine. I wish they had done sort of the typical shonen thing where they explained it in great detail. As in this particular instance, it would have helped me, the viewer, not be confused. I guess it sort of is okay since we're sort of in a comical kind of episode anyway, where I go like, that looks ridiculous. And perhaps as he's using it in later fights, more things will clear up. But yeah, it was sort of an odd sort of thing for me to just sort of kind of be dropped into very suddenly.
Well, so to that too, I'll make 2 or 3 points real quick. One, if they don't explain it in show, they tend to do that sort of thing in like a light novel, or they had entire interviews off to the side on the soundtrack.
Yeah.
So if you purchase the soundtrack or get access to it, there will be these intermittent interviews with each of the fighters, and they'll just have a back and forth. So that's a good way to get information, especially during that day and age. Secondly, this is well before we start getting into what we look at as the standard shonen structure that became more popular with DBZ as time went on. And we started seeing in things like Yu-Gi-Oh! And other like card games and things like that. To over-explain it is to help build the tension and help bring the understanding to whoever the audience is to understand why the stakes are as high as they are. It is more sports casting, but where literally the only 2 people that have a stake in the matter are the 2 fighters until we see the Shaolin monks up top. That's the only reason that we get to see any type of heads up as to what brings the fight to a draw. Domon's about to crush Dragon Gundam's head, but Dragon Gundam gets its sword-like whip ponytail around the neck of his Gundam. So if he crushes the head, he also loses his.
And I would also like to sort of congratulate Domon on his sort of small character growth in this episode, as I think it was the most reasonable he has asked somebody if they had seen the photo. Very casually,
Yes.
Oh, hey, have you seen this photo? No. Like, that's sort of how I imagined, it still feels kind of awkward when and where it happened, but like it's sort of a little more grounded, and it sort of happens. And then 10 minutes more of episodes happen, but then they let Saisaishi and the monks leave, and he's like, yeah, we can leave him alone. It appears they have nothing to do with the guy we're looking for. But then I thought, well, how do you know that? He could have been lying. He seems to be lying the whole time. Also, if you do want to just believe him, he told you this 10 minutes ago, so I don't know why we still had to kind of go through a whole thing about that already, unless it's just sort of trying to draw our attention to this mysterious figure that I have thoughts about when we kind of compare it with the Gundam Wing episode.
Yeah, it is definitely trying to do that that concept of let's pull attention to this situation for now. And we're trusting Saisaishi because he is a trickster individual, but he is not a deceitful directly individual. Even though we don't have Domon acknowledging that the entire time he was hung like a piñata and being beaten and drowned. That
yeah,
it's not like he didn't understand that Sai was covering his own ass. He just didn't understand to what extent. He's a kid, and so far the kid hasn't shown that he's a fighter. So he's covering his ass, and Domon has shown in the past, if somebody cannot fight, he will understand the tactics that they take.
So is there like a greater view that Japan holds on China about that is reflected in the Saisaishi character, would you say?
I would say we're at another show, maybe. Because it's this show and the structure that it's using, which is very similar to a lot of tokusatsu style shows. If I haven't said it before in previous episodes, tokusatsu is live action special effects media. If you've watched Godzilla, you've watched a tokusatsu. But this is really just taking the most prevalent flavors of each nation and applying them to an individual. The trickster concept, it could be a call out. But I would say that I doubt it. Is probably more that they just wanted to have that type of Son Goku type character in the party down the line. If it hasn't been clear yet, the past handful of episodes have shown that these different Gundam fighters are of some import. it is likely that we are going to see them again. And as you already alluded to with Gundam Battle Assault 2, if you have a character in a video game,
yeah,
you're probably important.
Probably made the cut. That's not totally true, because there are some odd choices in Gundam Battle Assault 2 from some of the earlier shows, particularly like you have to put a Zaku in, but nobody really notable pilots a Zaku, so it's like or some of these other kind of the water version of the Zaku, so you have like they're not random, but they're like one-off characters, and you're like, oh, you made the cut, did you? Very fancy. Guy with weird nose from episode 29. And then there's also a video game that has a character from an episode that got cut from the broadcast run that doesn't air anymore because the original Gundam creator hated it so much because the animation quality was so bad in that one. But that character now has sort of become infamous for being cut, so he gets sort of into games a lot too. Sort of an interesting episode, not to sort of digress into a different Gundam show, but it's sort of a strong look at PTSD and sort of how it affects, soldiers who still think the war is going on and things like that. So, unfortunate that one sort of had to get on the chopping block. So moving on to Gundam Wing, before we kind of talk about what I think is sort of a structural difference between these two that we kind of get a good glance at in this episode. There's an opening scene where it's the second time we've met this character in the blue coat. His name's Trace Kushranada. He sort of runs the specials group that's within this Oz, which is a branch of the Alliance military. And I just want to talk about sort of the visual directing and writing that's going on here, because it's so dense and well done. It's somewhat impressive compared
Are we talking about the shooting scene?
Yeah, somewhat compared to sort of other Gundams and even Gundam Wing and sort of what anime was doing at the time on this kind of weekly basis. So we have, just to describe it very briefly, Trace is talking with Zex on the computer phone while he's at this sort of like shooting gallery at his estate. And there are these little targets kind of popping up, and he's standing there with the rifle in his hand, sort of ignoring them. You have your traditional kind of like bloodhound hanging out by his side. And they're having this conversation about what to do with all these Gundams kind of happening. And eventually he sort of sends Zex off to kind of go to Corsica and deal with them. And along the way, that's where he'll find the tall geese. But he doesn't shoot until a bird flies up, and then he takes the shot at the same time that he says, shoot him down for me, Zex. And it is great because whatever you think it reveals about the character now is kind of true. But also, it's going to take on an extremely different meaning about 20 episodes from now, too. So it's this just sort of good foreshadowing, but also implying what they want you to know about him now, while being augmented later on in kind of a got you type of moment. And there's sort of just having him with the gun gives us an idea of what it is. You have him in this estate. You have him in this old kind of attire with the bloodhound, kind of shooting the fake game with target practice. So then when the Alliance commander and the Zeppelin sort of talks about them kind of starting war for sport, you kind of link it to that. But then later on, you'll kind of realize the scene has a very different tone when you know more about kind of both the characters involved therein. And it's sort of very impressive. And our introduction to Trace wasn't terribly interesting, but we're going to get a few scenes like this now going forward that kind of hint at something more going on here. And as I briefly alluded to with the Alliance officer, there's also something very interesting in this show that is akin to an unreliable narrator, where different characters are going to give us a whole bunch of different information, and we could just assume it to be true, but what we're going to find out over the course of the show is that a lot of it isn't, and a lot of people are just sort of misunderstanding what we're going on, but it's being given to us in a traditional kind of anime exposition fashion that we have no reason not to take it for truth. But later on, we're going to realize sort of how mistaken everybody was. And it's an interesting device that was sort of done here and isn't really done in many other shows. Generally, Gundam and even sort of media in general, when they give you information, it just sort of is there. Unless you're doing like a spy show or a crime case where you want these red herrings. But the show isn't doing it for a red herring kind of point of view. It's doing it thematically to get you to reevaluate kind of preconceived notions. So that's sort of my little rant on kind of Gundam Wing there.
Yeah, well, to that same effect, though, I'm going to note that I took the same things away from the shooting scene, but with knowing nothing, I have not done any looking in advance or anything. I had figured there was a reason for the cardinal being the type of bird that comes out.
It's not really, it doesn't, the bird itself sort of doesn't matter. It's that there were all these sort of dummy targets he could have shot, but he wasn't interested in them. He was only interested in the live prey. And so
that was like the surface level.
And so you can look at it sort of like, oh, he just sort of is out for blood, and then the Alliance, but there's actually a different reason why he did that we'll get to find out soon, and it makes him such a very interesting and rich character.
Sure. And then I will also note it's interesting to see, I think you called him Walker earlier, correct?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
All right. Yeah, seeing the Walker character approaching Zex, giving him the ability to access the Tallgeese, which I'm to understand was very, like, you have to be a select member to be able to even see this thing, let alone access it.
Kind of. It's sort of not that special. It's just this old thing that was in, like he says, it was sort of in a museum. But it's
the closest thing that we had to a Gundam for the Alliance to have access to.
Yeah, the Alliance bigwigs thought it was sort of this useless kind of overproduced, junk. It's you'll see it's much larger than even the Gundams. It's this giant honking thing. It actually the head looks like a Leo head, other than, you can take the face mask off, and I don't know if they do it in the show, but in other media, they sort of take it off during it being built or being repaired, and it just has the normal mono eye for the Leo face, and they just sort of put this thing on it to kind of you make it more unique.
Okay.
But yeah, so they moved it here because they were going to rebuild it, but then they know the base is being attacked, and they want Zex to take it out of there and not fight in the upcoming battle, because it's sort of their best hope at defeating the Gundams. And it actually pains Zex and his other sort of extra soldier who gets a name, his name is Otto, that they have to leave and they can't fight in the battle and help out their allies.
Yes, well, to that effect, too, that brings me to the point that I was actually trying to go toward, which is after Walker gives Zex the opportunity to take Tallgeese, he and his squadron go out with the knowledge that they are going to die.
Yes.
Specifically, so the Elderman, who was complaining about the aristocracy looking at this more as a game than an actual battle of life and death, he begrudgingly accepts this gift of the cost of their lives to gain the information necessary. It's a kamikaze, a divine wind act that they are trying to go about doing to get in the way of the Gundams, to see what the Gundams are capable of, so that they can better prepare themselves when it is time to get rid of them.
Yes, and I think it's sort of an important scene, and especially to have it so strongly tied to Zex, because it's going to foreshadow a lot what's going on with him. Treize isn't really sort of involved in this, so we don't kind of get it to leap off to him yet, or at least very directly, but we're going to sort of go into a similar direction with him later on as well. And so you'll be able to kind of tell sort of the specials, the Oz soldiers versus the Alliance soldiers, based on the hats that they wear. On Earth, they're going to have little lions on them, and in space, they're going to have tin men on them. As they're called Oz, and so they chose to reference the Wizard of Oz, even though Oz stands for Order of the Zodiac, which is why all the mobile suits are going to be named after astrological signs.
Oh, well, when they gave us Piscis and Cancer, of course I figured that.
Yes, but that's sort of that's what Oz stands for, but then the creators took the Oz sort of abbreviation and kind of ran with it in another direction, and we're even going to have a Dorothy character later on, too.
Well, I was also curious whether or not we were going to see something in the way of a strawman situation.
Yeah, I know.
The Scarecrow.
I thought it was odd that they didn't try to fit all three in, but I guess it didn't come up, and so they picked the Tin Men. Sort of makes sense for stuff that will happen later on. The Lion, I wonder almost if the Lion was accidental, and then they're like, well, we need a thing for space. What can we do for that? And then they're like, oh, well, we did the Lion. It'd be funny if we did a Tin Man.
Do they call them Tin Men? Because it's very easy to just believe that it's space, so robot.
I mean, yeah, you'll see it when it kind of looks like sort of the old, not sort of the movie version per se, but like these old illustrations
Like the L. Frank Baum.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it looks more like that version. And we can come up with, when they go into the space section of it. This episode probably has the most ridiculous Heero Yui things of him being able to do everything. It goes down a lot after this, fortunately. But also, their way to they seem to acknowledge that it's kind of ridiculous because everybody else lampshade dims it. Where they're like, how can you do that? How can he do this? I hope he's on our side. So at least they're not like putting it out there because they're like, oh, this will be cool. It's more like, we have to write this quickly. He gets out of this like that. And in the manga version, they kind of just remove a lot of it. Like, we don't need to know he's affecting his brain waves and pulse. So they just sort of cut it. And then it feels a little less ridiculous.
I was going to say,
in that regard.
One cannot actively deal with their brainwave. Their brain is what makes them be able to think to begin with. And if you're thinking, that's already your brainwave.
Yeah, I don't even know. Like, I don't know why. I don't know. Of course, they had to explain it because it makes no sense. So they have to tell us it's what's happening, and we go, okay. But also, I don't know you're monitoring his brainwaves. I don't need to know. You're just looking at him. He seems to be unconscious. Fine. Like I'm
think it was
okay.
just a common thing for sci-fi.
I'm okay suspending that disbelief,
brainwaves.
and so I'm glad when they went back and redid it, they quote unquote fixed it per se, and didn't draw so much attention to it.
What I'm more disturbed by is his ability to reset a broken bone and then just use 2 wrenches and whatever gauze was around to tie it off to then be able to walk and seemingly not worry about the pain. He doesn't really show any wincing or anything as he walks.
Yes, there is a bit of a limp, but you're right. He doesn't either show the pain or feel the pain. But I believe that a little more than this brainwave blood pulse
more
stuff.
than
So I'm like, okay, this guy just fucking is really dedicated, and he's trained in how to do this, and he was aware of all these shortcomings. And now that his Gundam's back, sort of the death wish is going to be sort of gone a little bit because now he can resume his missions.
Yes.
So, he tried to kill himself jumping out the building. He's like, finally, for some reason, Relina, just hearing his words, her words convince him to deploy the chute. He still doesn't sort of go very well for him, but, that's why he has to reset his leg.
Yeah. Well, I think it's more interesting to me that the fact that he doesn't even acknowledge that it's because of Relina. It's that either we're given the misdirection or we're supposed to believe that he just doesn't understand why he chickened out at the last second.
Yeah, and he kind of questions it himself too. So I like that we don't yet know, and it allows us to be more active participants in this production. And sort of, I've been working on kind of a spec script for a mystery thriller comedy for kind of like young adults. And there they kind of want you to over explain everything, and it drives me crazy. So I my first pass, I try to kind of keep it subtle. I don't want to be overly expositional and hitting it on the nose too much. And they're like, no, you got to put it in. They're not going to understand. We need more of this. We're not getting it. And I go, okay, but you get it later. And they go, yeah, but we need to get it now so that we're not confused. And so
that's bad writing.
I know. So I like, with Relina's fascination with Heero and Heero's, last second pulling of the parachute. I like that we're not sort of, they don't want to tell us yet why some of these things are happening. And there are some things we don't even know. Very soon we're going to find out that Wu Fei, the pilot we've spent the least amount of time with so far, he doesn't want to, some of these people don't know there are other Gundam pilots. He does, but doesn't want to work with them for a reason we don't find out until the movie. And, Troa surrenders to Catra and assumes him to be an enemy. And we don't kind of know that. We don't know the reason for that yet, again, until the movie. So I just sort of like that we kind of get these little things we get to ponder in our mind as we try to build who these people are in our minds that allows us to participate better with the media.
I appreciate Catra, you said?
Yes.
Okay. I appreciate Catra because they and Duo Maxwell seem more Heero-like than the other 3 pilots so far.
Well, so
I can't wait to see that development.
Yeah, there's actually, I sort of had a theory when I watched this back at the beginning of the 2010 decade. That there's sort of like the five of the, or at least, the four of them that aren't Heero are sort of like kind of traditional versions of heroes in different cultures. And Heero maybe is this attempt at kind of a new version of it. Heero, they all five might be sort of in that same vein of being these sort of traditional heroes. And we can talk about it more as we get to know them better.
Certainly.
But certainly, I don't know, for sort of American cartoons, Catra and Duo can feel like the most accessible kind of protagonist archetypes in our imagination. So I think it's sort of probably good that they pair them with Trowa and Heero as a way to kind of bring more yin to their yang, so to speak. And you're going to get to see that develop a little bit over the course of the series, and I think in the immediate episodes specifically. So what sort of came to my mind this week as I was comparing these two shows and sort of why I was struggling with G Gundam and Gundam Wing, I think, I know G Gundam's going to transition a little bit, halfway through towards the end. But I think to watch it now, you can't sort of view it like a Gundam show. You kind of have to view it like a sports show because, a lot of, the problem I have with him asking the picture of the brother is I don't know why. I don't know if that guy's good. I don't know if that guy's bad. I don't know why it matters to Domon. And there's not even really sort of a hint at which direction it could go towards. It's just sort of this thing where they're like, you want to be interested. And, it can be sort of cheesy that you come into Gundam Wing, you're like, another bad Federation government setup. But having that, knowing they're the bad guys, at least to start, sort of gives you something to hold on to as you're kind of navigating through this and understanding what their objectives are. So if you view G Gundam as the sports Gundam as opposed to kind of your space soap opera thing at the moment, you have an easier time digesting the way the plot's kind of structured in this kind of combat battle. And so you're kind of okay with the longer battle with Sasaishi and wish for a longer battle with the American Gundam. That's sort of, I guess, what's been my takeaway in how these two have been exploring exposition and why they might have done something very different, but also polarizing because I think they're trying to be two different genres inside of the Gundam meta series.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I will say that I'm looking ahead a little bit here on my side with G Gundam.
On the G Gundam side, yeah.
And yes, so episode 6, which is after we've gotten to know all of the important players, is when we get more information on why the man in the picture is of import and what the mission of Domon Kasshu really is. Because I'm not going to say quite exactly why he is acting in the way that he is, but he has more on his plate than just win for Neo Japan.
Yeah, and I don't need to know why this early on. I'm okay with some of that mystery, but I need to know, I guess I need an inkling of what direction it's going to go in because... And
4 and 5, they do that.
Yeah, which is fine. I almost wonder, but I think when you're starting, I don't know, I don't think it's good practice. G Gundam clearly got away with it, but I don't think it's good practice, and it's probably been so difficult as I rewatch it to sort of hold that off for so long because it's sort of the juiciest through line that we have, and it might help explain, some of Domon's odd behavior and help normalize the weird instances when he's asking these people and the narrator about this thing. To just be like, all right, he needs to protect him, or all right, he needs to stop him, or all right, he's got a score to settle. Like something, just a little hint, like where it could be a line that he says or Rain says, where it's like, it's just some throwaway thing to be like, okay, in the first episode, we're like, okay, so we got to figure out who this guy is for this reason. Go Domon, I'm on board, and also we're going to get in little sporting events in the meantime because we're in a sports anime. That would help me, the viewer, and again, the show clearly doesn't need it. It's very popular, but I think that would have, if it gets redone, I think that's something maybe that they would look at.
I see where you're coming from with it. My conflict with that is without having this understanding of the other players, it is hard to understand why Domon is acting the way that he is if we're fed that right away. Episode 6 is the point where we actually get more about why Domon acts the way he is, and then we get to ruminate on the prior episodes. This also gives us the connection to how he's going to interact with other Gundam fighters as he presses forward, and how their interactions with people on Earth are going to help us paint a more detailed picture of who Domon is, why he acts the way he does, and what his true desires are. And it's not going to be that we're getting all that in episode 6, but we get why we have to wait until.
So I'm fine with that. I'm fine with that, but I guess structurally, that I worry that that's too late, and I'm already spending 3 episodes kind of lost, just sort of treading water, being like, okay, why are we here though? Why is he doing that? Is he doing it? Does he want to help Japan be the leader? Is it just knowing that he wants revenge, I think helps justify his actions more, helps us like him more. And I don't even remember if that's what he wants, but just something to indicate, what his drive is can help make him more human for me. And so that's all I'll say about that. And if I'm wrong in episode 6, I'll be like, okay, sounds good. But I'll
also say that 4 and 5, especially 4 versus 5, we are going to get a better sense of what is motivating Domon. And it's not having to be handed to us on a silver platter. It's handed to us on a lunch tray.
Which could be fine. But
yeah, we're getting crumbs,
which could be fine. But then my argument would be, well, then make that one episode 2. And I don't know. Perhaps the American character becomes more important later on, or perhaps the American character, you were hoping to get the American audience with it. So there was a marketing purpose behind it, but I don't know. I read the original Gundam and Gundam Wing both kind of got rewritten, decades after they were released, to kind of help clean them up and bring them into more modern kind of storytelling guidelines with no restrictions, because you're just sort of writing on a piece of paper. So I'm just sort of, as I'm going through this, I think what would have been better approach to do. And so I don't know. I'll watch episode 4, 5, and 6, and then we can kind of rediscuss during that week as we talk about the structure of both. Because around episode 5 or 6 as well, maybe it's 7, so maybe it won't sync up perfectly. But around that point too, there's going to be a major shift in Gundam Wing as well. And so it could be interesting to see, like, okay, both shows have sort of reset a little bit. How is that helping them? What is the advantage of waiting so long? So that could be an interesting topic of that episode.
Well, because I was going to say to that other end too, in my watch so far of Wing, it is not that it is slow, but I have a sort of stagnation of the energy level of the thing. It is definitely, as you've said before, a space opera, but it doesn't seem to me that the characters have really done anything. It's kind of a bumpy road, because we already start so high with the very first handful of scenes in episode 1 with our anti-heroic main character, with our, subterfuge and intrigue already being laid out early on. It goes up, and then it's hanging out on this plateau. And I'm sure that very much like G Gundam feels to you, Wayne is feeling to me, and I'm hoping that we either get a drop and an up, or just even a straight 90-degree incline.
Well, so
I'm looking forward to that.
So I don't sort of agree with what Gundam Wing does in its opening anyway. I sort of preface in the first episode that they're both, Gundam in general takes about 5 episodes to really get going, because they do have to set a lot of things up. And so I'm not sort of, poo-pooing G Gundam for sort of taking it slow in that regards. But why I think I was able, as a 12-year-old, to watch Gundam Wing and be like, all right, I'm on board, versus G Gundam, is that Gundam Wing at least sets itself up like, okay, these guys are going to stop these bad guys because they're the alliance is, oppressing people. So like you have that. It's not sort of very prevalent yet. We don't fully know why anyone's doing anything, but there's that thing hanging over the background that gives us a direction. And I just don't feel that the direction right now from G Gundam, from sort of a neophyte's point of view, mine, is that, all right, we are going to have a Gundam fight. The winner is going to rule the nation. And I don't think that's enough for me to care, because I don't know what the stakes are. Like, who cares if Japan rules over America, over Italy? So, so the juiciest thing we have is this photo thing. It's just not enough for me to kind of sink my teeth into, because there's just nothing. It's just this weird off-putting thing that he does that confuses me. And not in sort of like, I'm not intrigued, because I don't know how to, it could be anything, and I don't know what the stakes on that are. So I don't, it could be something like, oh, somebody's life is in danger, and maybe we think it's the guy in the photo. and that could be a mislead, or maybe we think that the guy in the photo is gonna hurt somebody, and that could be a mislead. So like it would just give us a direction to go in that Gundam Wing gives. And I admit Gundam Wing isn't giving us an interesting one, and it's sort of tired, especially after all the Gundam shows that came before G Gundam. But it was something. It was enough for 12-year Patrick to want to keep watching that, but not want to keep watching G Gundam. And not that one is right or wrong, because I would fix both of them, and the manga sort of does for Gundam Wing. And I'm just trying to think if G Gundam were to have like a real manga and not the weird thing that it got shortly after its release, how would you kind of handle this opening section? Because you'd have to do something, especially for a modern audience. So what's the smartest way to take it? And so, that's
maybe
all.
We'll do a special sometime where we do a fanficky sort of thing where we do a script cleanup. We can do that after we do our live movie watch.
Yeah, that would be sort of an interesting tactic. Okay, so we've sort of gone on our story beats section for a while. So now on to the way we go. So this week, what these episodes sort of made me think is that these two shows came out a year apart. And I don't know how it looks to you, but the animation to me in G Gundam looks way better. And I don't know why. And not that the animation in G Gundam was bad, but it looks like sort of an 80s type of animation style, where Gundam Wing feels like sort of a more 90s type of style. And so I'm just wondering, is this a tone that it took, or did some technology thing happen in the 90s that allowed it sort of have this kind of surprisingly improved upgrade between a year? Or was it sort of they didn't want to give a lot of money to G Gundam because they didn't know it was going to do well, but then it did really well, so then they were okay investing in Gundam Wing? What are your sort of, I don't know, is this something you even noticed? Is this something you disagree with?
I do disagree with it. I think it might be that there were, because it's not like I'm doing a deep dive on all the anime that happened in 94 and 95, or 95, 96, whatever the timeline is here. But it's 94, excuse me. So 94 to 95. I am willing to say that they are different in their art direction. I don't think it's necessarily that there was a major shift in technology quite yet. I know that, as I've talked to you before, and we mentioned, I think back in episode 1, dirty cell, clean cell.
Yes.
I like the idea of having these hand-drawn cells, which, by the way, after we had that conversation, I did dig around a bit on eBay to try and find a couple of cells from G Gundam just to have on my walls.
Mm-hmm.
I think that it definitely leaned more on a anime martial arts style, as opposed to a space opera style, in terms of not just its story structure, but its animation. Even just in this episode 3, you get a lot of these several fists in front of Domon to simulate the fact that he is moving so fast that he's punching in 5 different points at the same time. We are supposed to be impressed with his martial technique. That is a thing that you can shorthand. That is why you can have those types of animation. Compare that to Gundam Wing. Gundam Wing does have a lot of these sharper edges to facial structures and building shapes, and it's creating this rigid world. That's already a step in a different direction.
Mm-hmm.
Our flow of the fall and everything else that's happening during this episode that we just saw, these are all supposed to give us a greater sense of reality. We don't assume that people who are having martial arts fights in giant robots that don't require piloting, but instead maneuvering with microbot pleather suits, we don't assume that that is anything close to real, and tack on some of the more mystical or spiritual aspects that do come up as the series presses forward. We already know that we're outside of the realm of what Gundam is. So that's why we have that kind of animation. It feels more like a Dragon Ball, a Yu Yu Hakusho, what have you.
Well, so that's interesting. So I guess the animation style of those feel more to me, like the level of animation feel more to me like Gundam Wing. G Gundam feels more like Ranma 1/2 or Lupin the Third. Like it feels like there's sort of like a hesitance to add too much movement and sort of a reliance. Gundam Wing relies on stock footage, so maybe that's what allows it to do more movement when it's not doing that. But there's a stilt, there's occasionally a stiltedness in G Gundam that makes me go like, well, why did they do that? And it changed. But I'll keep paying attention to it as we go forward.
I was going to say, because this episode, just to interrupt you for a second, this episode, I will give you, does very much feel like a Ranma 1/2 Lupin the Third, but I think that's because of the comedic take on it so far.
Yeah, it could be.
I'll even say that in episode 1, with the way that they paint out Nero's Gundam with Michelob Chariot, that is a very weird shaped individual, but that's also to make him striking to us as we press forward.
Sure. So feel free to leave any notes in the comments on what do you guys think of the different animation styles? What's the different art direction doing? Did something happen between 94 and 95 that might have led to something in transitioning the animation styles? All right, Bob, what sort of came up in your mind this week as you were watching these?
Well, when I was watching these, I found myself, again, being surprised that between the two series, I was more able to suspend my disbelief with G Gundam over Gundam Wing, where neither of these things should have a greater or lesser amount of suspension of disbelief, because these are both clearly a kind of sci-fi fantasy. It felt more like you were willing to believe in the absurd nature of G Gundam because it already gave us so much early on, with even outside of the Gundam Michelob Chariot's able to do like a laser kick. We are already under the assumption of treat this like Street Fighter, treat this like Dragon Ball. So this, even with the absurd, like, hey, we have the dragon hover carts going over everywhere and everything, that was believable because of the way that we've had this world set up. However, in Gundam Wing, we're supposed to believe this to be a more realistic war setting, and yet we have this kid who, unless we find out that he's an android or some sort of like bio warrior thing or whatever, he is doing so many out there things. And whether it's shorthanding for the writers at the time, because for those of you who don't know, anime is done under crunch with a lot of artists and writers having to rush just to get out product for your greedy, drooling mouths. So respect and appreciate those individuals, not just the directors. I'm sorry, soapboxes appeared underneath me. But I would say that it seems like there is less to believe in Wing when some of these things jar you out of the reality of Zex and Trace and all these other individuals who are living a war world. And then you have these kids that are like, yeah, but anime. So I think that it's more jarring for me to see big events in Wing than to see big events in G Gundam at this point.
I think it certainly helps G Gundam that it takes itself less seriously, that it can do sort of those moments and sort of stray very far away from the realistic robo kind of structure of the original Gundam. It gives it a freedom to kind of take more of those liberties because that's the world it wants to have.
Well, yeah, and this is where I got a little thrown off when you were talking about the budgeting between G Gundam and Gundam Wing. We already established that G Gundam is the 15th anniversary series. If they were going to put any money anywhere, it should have been in G
Yeah, but
Gundam.
I don't know, because it's so different from what they were used to. It makes me think that they didn't know if it was going to take off or not, because it's really Gundam in name only. They're not even mobile suits. So it just felt like it was such a drastic departure. They didn't know how it was going to be handled. So I guess that was my thought.
So it's funny that they renamed it. For those of you who aren't looking at the full title, typically we're seeing Mobile Suit at the beginning of any Gundam series, except for G Gundam, where it is Mobile Fighter G Gundam. And I think that distinction is weird, because I would sooner think of a fighter jet when I hear Mobile Fighter than Mobile Suit, where I would see it as something that is associated with the individual inside having some control over it, whether it be like a exoskeleton or something to that nature. So to see those names reversed on each other is interesting from a phonetics, a word association place, but taken further, that might be worth noting now, obviously as a post-fact thing, because we are taking the unreal in a reality and flipping it on its head, taking a realistic stance with how we would actually use Gundams at this point in the real world. We wouldn't just have robots necessarily walking through the streets and setting blaze to villages, one would hope. But we would probably have these big spectacle events where individuals could watch two people using their respective robots to fight in a sports-like situation. So to have that shifting of what is the reality and what is the fantasy is, I think, what is interesting to me about these two series so far.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm biased because I've seen sort of other Gundams, and so I sort of know. There's like a long history about how Gundams ended up becoming weapons in the UC that carries over into the prologue of Gundam Wing, where they're sort of mobile workers for a while. They're construction material, and then they start to become applications for war because they're better at. They're really meant for space fighting because they're so maneuverable, and you want to give them hands because sort of the way you can kind of get in and out of colonies and unlock things and things like that. The legs are purely, partly, not purely, but partly aesthetic and partly in case you have to make a landing somewhere. Though you could use wheels, and some of the early Gundams actually do have wheels instead. So I don't know. I guess for me, it feels weird you would spend so much money on the big spectacle. But now, as I say it aloud, probably not. But it's easier for me to buy it as a war tool because I sort of see how they got there after 40 years of kind of R&D on the product. And they'll sort of talk about, the Gundam's relation or Mobile Suit's relationship to war throughout Gundam Wing. You can also put some comments in the show below. Which do you find more believable? Which world are you more okay with inhabiting / watching and engaging with? All right, Bob, real quick before we wrap up here, I'd like you to come take a stroll with me into the Nerd Corner. So this week what I've got, so a while ago, Shinji told me about this manga he was reading, and he really, really, really wanted me to read it. Shinji Hall, a longtime friend, a fellow Gundam aficionado. He wanted me to read this manga called Goodnight Pun Pun. I had never heard of it, and I said, okay, fine. And what he usually does when he wants me to read something is he sends me like a link to some website with a scan. But for some reason, he insisted this time to mail me the 7.5 giant volumes of this manga, the big fancy Tokuban style manga. And I was like, why? And he goes, no, Pat, you don't get it. You have to feel it in your hands. You have to. And so I read about a chapter a day in the morning when I wake up. And about a third of the way through volume 2 out of 6.5. It is genius. And I sort of have a problem with manga and comic books in general. There's something about the medium I have a hard time engaging with, and the only manga I've really read are ones based off of animations I've already seen. But this manga, notably, I haven't had an issue with for some reason. I'm not sure why. And it sort of blends a lot of art styles. Sometimes he'll take sort of real photos and put them in the background of his animated characters. Some characters are just sort of photos of people interacting around, and the main character himself just looks like a little bird ghost, even though he's supposed to be a person. When the manga starts, he's in elementary school. In volume 2, he's now in middle school. But he's still bird person, like to the point where the backpack he has to be tied around his waist because he doesn't have shoulders like the normal looking kids. It sort of very strongly and smartly utilizes the page very well to control pacing and editing. I can sort of visualize how this would be sort of an animated type thing, or even sort of an oddly kind of like a live action mixed media kind of thing. The main character and his family all look like bird ghosts. I'm not sure why yet. Everybody else looks like a person, but like really odd, grotesque, carnival-like people, all doing sort of ridiculous things. We're sort of in like an odd, I want to say it's sort of like a David Lynch kind of world. It's seemingly a more cynical version. David Lynch is sort of oddly optimistic. This one sort of seems to be a little more cynical and kind of poking fun at more than kind of elucidating sort of these odd kind of quirks, but still very good. So go find it, support this guy. I forget his name at the moment. He's written, I'll put it in the show notes, he's written a lot of other things that I'm excited to kind of take a look at once I read through this series. Bob, what did you kind of find in the nerd corner this week?
Well, it's funny you say that because I am trying to find a picture to share with you, and if I can find it proper, I'll try to give you the link so we can throw it in the show notes. But when I had been looking for some of those G Gundam cells that I'd mentioned earlier,
yes,
I was trying to look for other various things. I've told you, and this is part of the nerd corner, I've been getting interested in model making. I build models on my Twitch stream. Right now it's looking like Wednesdays at 7 Eastern. I do a little bit of a kit. Lately, they've been Figurized series, different Common Riders, but I do have a Gundam Astray Red frame and a Master Grade, that's a Master Grade, and a Master Grade God Gundam, a Gundam that you'll see later in G Gundam and one of my favorite models. But I digress. The other part of this is I'd found G Gundam toys that are not Mobile Fighter G Gundam. There are another line of Gundam toys that seem to connect with each other, and I don't know if they're just like an offshoot toy line before Gundam became the series we all know and know, because I'm not going to say that everybody loves Gundam, and that's fine. It doesn't look like it's the same quality as a flea market toy. It does look like it was an original run of toys, and I'm just trying to find a picture to represent that. Like I said, if I don't do it on stream right now, on the thread right now, I'll get it to you at some point.
That's fine, yeah.
It's just interesting to see how diverse the toy line of Gundam got to be after the series did take off. And I just thought that was interesting.
All right, yeah, we'll put a link down there for you as well. All right, everybody, we'd like to thank you all for listening, and we'd like to thank this week and going forward. I've brought my audio engineer from my other podcast. His name is Lev Van Rensselaer. He's going to be watching our audio boards from now on and mixing us down some smooth sounds, so we'd like to thank him as well. And of course, we'd like to thank.
Been a while, bud.
And of course, we'd like to thank my co-host Bob Skerry. Bob, you got a plug for us?
Yes, you can find me on Twitter, Twitch, and Instagram as Bob Skerry VOA. That's BOBSKERRY VOA. You can find other links of mine on my link tree. Most of you know how to do that, but linktr.ee/BobSkerryVOA. And if you go to bobskerryvoa.com, you can listen to my commercial, my character, and my narration reels. So please, if you're interested in hiring me to just do some lines for your tabletop RPG game so you don't have to worry so much on your side, or if you want to hire me as a voice actor, or if you just want to talk shop, swing by somewhere and find me.
And I am Patrick Skeyhill. You can find my shorts, animations, features, documentaries, film essays at quixoticunited.com and presumably social media named very similar. All right, we just want to thank you all for listening. Bob, tell the audience how much you love them.
Oh, I love you so much. Thank you so much for coming by.